The day began like any other on Orpheus Station, a sprawling orbiting research hub on the edge of the Andromeda expanse. Rylan Tovik, was busy recalibrating the station's atmospheric stabilizers when a broadcast crackled through the comms, catching me off guard. "Attention, personnel. A visitor has arrived at Dock 9, the automated voice announced. I raised an eyebrow. Visitors weren't unusual, but the tone of the announcement suggested something off. Dock 9 was reserved for high-priority arrivals, usually dignitaries or military personnel. Curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed my tablet and jogged to the docking bay. The sight that greeted me made my stomach knot. A sleek, black cruiser hovered silently in the docking bay, its hull reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights above. The craft bore no insignia, yet the air around it crackled with authority. From within, a tall figure emerged, Commandant Yarrick Voran, the notorious enforcer of the Orion Coalition. I had heard of him, of course. Tales of his ruthlessness were whispered in the corridors of every research hub in the quadrant. And here he was, striding toward me like a storm. I looked at him blankly, trying to hide the thrill of fear prickling my spine. "Rylan Tovik," he said, his voice low and commanding. "I've come to discuss your experiment." I blinked. "Experiment?" I asked, masking the rapid beat of my heart. "You mean the antimatter containment project?" Voran's eyes narrowed.
"Exactly.
"The one your team has been working on without authorization from the Coalition. Do you realize the potential dangers?" I shrugged, casually leaning against a console. "Dangerous?"
"Sure."
"Exciting?"
"Definitely."
"But dangerous enough for a show of force?" I added with a smirk. That's when the first mistake happened. I laughed. Just a short, sharp laugh, the kind that can get you into trouble when you're dealing with someone like Voran. He stiffened, clearly unused to being treated lightly. He took a deliberate step closer, his boot clanging against the metal floor. "I assure you, Tovik, I am not here for pleasantries." I raised an eyebrow. "Pleasantries? You barely said hello. You just marched in like a stormtrooper and started lecturing me about safety protocols." Voran's jaw tightened, and I sensed the shift in his aura. This was no ordinary reprimand. He intended to intimidate me. And, strangely enough, that's when I realized I wasn't intimidated. Not in the slightest. The next hour was a carefully choreographed display of force. Voran ordered his guards to position themselves strategically, activated a series of security drones around the lab, and even demonstrated a live detonation of a controlled antimatter sphere, right in the central containment chamber. And I, for reasons I can't fully explain, did nothing. I watched with detached amusement as he flexed his authority. Finally, he turned to me, chest heaving slightly from exertion, and said, "Do you understand now, Tovik? One wrong move, and your station and everyone on it will be destroyed." I sighed, finally deciding it was time to respond. I leaned over my workstation and casually tapped a sequence into the console. The lights dimmed momentarily, and the hum of the stabilizer shifted into an odd, pulsating rhythm. "What are you doing?" Voran barked, glancing at the controls. "Relaxing," I said, my tone deceptively light. "You said my project was dangerous, right? Well, I'm about to prove just how dangerous it can be if handled correctly." His expression darkened, and I realized I might have gone too far. Yet again, I activated the containment protocol I had been developing in secret for months, the quantum feedback loop. It was designed to stabilize antimatter by creating a self-correcting energy field around it. But it was volatile, temperamental, and theoretically capable of amplifying energy output tenfold. The room vibrated as the containment chamber glowed with a bright, pulsating light. Drones whirred and guards took a step back, sensing the shift in energy. Voron's eyes widened, not with fear, but with incredulity. You're not intimidated?" he whispered, almost to himself. I shrugged again. Not even a little. You see, Commandant, showing force only works if the person you're trying to intimidate fears it. I don't. He stepped closer, tension radiating off him like heat from a furnace. This is madness. You have no idea what you're tampering with. Oh, I have an idea, I said, voice calm. And that's why I'm not afraid. The quantum feedback loop isn't just stabilization, it's control. And I control it. Voron froze, the weight of my words sinking in. His show of force, all those threats and demonstrations, had backfired spectacularly. I wasn't just calm, I was in command. For a long moment, we simply stared at each other. The room hummed with energy, a subtle but undeniable warning of the power at my fingertips. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. Low, almost grudgingly. You are remarkable, Tovik, he admitted, his voice losing some of its rigid authority. Few have ever stood up to me this way. I try, I replied lightly. Voron shook his head, a faint smirk appearing. Very well. Perhaps there is more to you than the coalition dossier suggested. But mark my words, do not mistake this reprieve for leniency. One wrong move and, I know, I interrupted, smiling faintly. You'll threaten me again, just like today. But I'll still stand here, calmly, as if it's all a game. He stared at me for another moment, then, with a flourish of his hand, turned and strode toward his cruiser. The guards followed silently, but their eyes lingered on me, measuring, calculating. Once the bay was empty, I leaned against the console and exhaled. The adrenaline coursing through me was unlike anything I'd felt before. I had stared down one of the most feared men in the galaxy, and lived. More than that, I had turned his own tactics against him without firing a single shot. Days passed, and the incident became the talk of Orpheus Station. Scientists whispered in corridors, guards exchanged stories of the young engineer who had unflinchingly faced Commandant Voron. But I didn't celebrate. My victory was quiet, almost private. I knew the coalition would not forget this, and neither would Voron. Weeks later, a message arrived through the secure channel. It was brief. Tovik, your approach is intriguing. I will return. Yarrick Voron. I smiled at the message. The war of wills had only just begun, and somehow I felt ready for it. The show of force that failed, it wasn't just about raw power. Voron had underestimated the human mind's capacity for calculation, improvisation, and calm under pressure. In his mind, authority was intimidation, intimidation was control, and control was obedience. He had failed to account for one thing. I wasn't obedient. I was strategic. By the time he realized his error, I had already established dominance, not by brute force, but by demonstrating composure in the face of danger. That was the lesson. A show of strength is only effective if the opponent respects it, or fears it. Voron froze, the hum of the quantum feedback loop thrumming through the lab like a heartbeat. He realized, too late, that his carefully orchestrated show of force had utterly failed. I wasn't flinching. I wasn't intimidated. I controlled the situation. For a long moment, silence hung between us. Then, unexpectedly, Voren laughed, a low, grudging sound, almost respect mixed with disbelief. You are remarkable, Tovik, he admitted, stepping back. Few have ever faced me without fear. Perhaps I underestimated you. I shrugged casually, letting the glow of the containment chamber wash over my face. Fear doesn't make one smart, Commandant. Calm does. He gave a short nod, signaling his guards. Consider this a temporary truce. But remember, Tovik, I will return. As his cruiser lifted off, the guard's eyes lingered on me, a mixture of awe and caution. I stayed behind in the lab, alone with the pulsating hum of antimatter containment, and finally let out the breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The station returned to normal, or as normal as it could, knowing that the galaxy's most feared enforcer had been bested by a single human mind. I had survived, yes, but more than that, I had proven that intelligence, calm, and courage could turn even a show of force into a display of its own weakness. I leaned back against the console, smiling faintly. Voren would return, and the Coalition would remember this day. But I wasn't afraid. Not now. Not ever. Because the greatest weapon isn't a cruiser, a squad of guards, or even an antimatter bomb. The greatest weapon is a mind that refuses to be intimidated. And I had mine.